I've been a detective with the Sacramento Police Department for 12 years, and what happened on March 15, 2023, still makes me question everything I thought I knew about federal law enforcement. What started as a routine domestic violence call turned into the most disturbing case of my career, and it was just the beginning of something much bigger. It was 2:47 a.m. when the call came in. Neighbors at the Sunrise Meadows apartment complex on Folsom Boulevard had reported screaming and what sounded like furniture being thrown around in Unit 4B. My partner, Detective Lisa Rodriguez, and I were working the graveyard shift, and domestic calls at that hour were nothing new. The rain was coming down hard that night, making everything slick and reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet. We pulled up to the complex and immediately noticed a black sedan with federal plates parked in the visitor section. That was unusual. Most domestic calls don't involve federal vehicles. The building manager, Mrs. Chin, met us at the entrance with her master key, wringing her hands nervously. "The screaming stopped about 10 minutes ago," she whispered. "But I heard glass breaking right before you arrived. The tenant in 4B is Sarah Mitchell. She's lived here for 8 months, keeps to herself mostly. Very quiet until tonight." We climbed the stairs, the sound of our wet boots echoing in the narrow hallway. Unit 4B was at the end, and as we approached, I could see the door was slightly ajar. That immediately put me on high alert. No light was coming from inside, but I could hear muffled sounds, like someone moving around carefully, trying not to make noise. Rodriguez positioned herself on one side of the door while I took the other. I knocked and announced our presence. "Sacramento PD? We received a noise complaint. Is everyone okay in there?" Silence. Then, a man's voice, calm and controlled. "Officers, this is Special Agent David Brennan, FBI. I have my credentials. There's been a situation here, but it's under federal jurisdiction now." That should have been reassuring, but something felt wrong. The way he said it was too rehearsed, too perfect. In 12 years, I'd worked with plenty of federal agents, and they don't usually show up to domestic violence calls at 3 a.m. without backup or prior notification to local PD. "Sir, we still need to perform a welfare check," I called back. "Please step to the door with your hands visible and your credentials ready." More silence. Then the sound of someone whispering urgently, a woman's voice, though I couldn't make out the words. She sounded terrified. The door opened slowly, and a man in his mid-40s appeared. He was tall, probably 6 feet 2 inches, with graying hair and wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt. Blood was on his knuckles, and there were scratches on his neck. He held up a leather credential wallet with what appeared to be a legitimate FBI badge and identification. "Agent Brennan," he said calmly. "Sacramento Field Office. I was conducting an interview with a witness when the situation became volatile. The subject attempted to flee and injured herself in the process. I have everything under control." But I could see past him into the apartment, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Furniture was overturned, there was broken glass everywhere, and I could see what looked like zip ties on the coffee table. This wasn't the aftermath of someone trying to flee. This looked like a crime scene. "Sir, I need you to step outside while we check on the welfare of anyone else in the apartment," Rodriguez said firmly. That's when his demeanor changed completely. The calm professionalism vanished, replaced by something predatory. "Officers, I'm ordering you to leave. This is a federal matter. You have no jurisdiction here. Federal agents don't order local police around like that. They coordinate, they cooperate, but they don't give orders during active situations." My hand moved instinctively toward my weapon. "Ma'am, if you're in there, please respond," I called out loudly. A woman's voice, weak and scared. "Help me, please." That was all I needed to hear. Rodriguez and I pushed past Agent Brennan, who made the mistake of trying to physically block us. As soon as he put his hands on Rodriguez, this became assault on a police officer, federal agent or not. What we found inside that apartment will haunt me forever. Sarah Mitchell was zip-tied to a chair in the bedroom, her face bruised and swollen. She was wearing only a torn shirt, and there were marks on her wrists that suggested she'd been restrained for hours. Around the apartment, we found a camera setup, hard drives, and what appeared to be documentation on at least a dozen other women. But here's the thing that still keeps me awake at night: David Brennan's FBI credentials were real. We ran them through federal databases, and he was indeed a 15-year veteran of the Sacramento Field Office, assigned to the Violent Crimes Unit. He had commendations, a clean record, and was supposed to be investigating human trafficking cases. The woman, Sarah Mitchell, told us through her tears that Brennan had contacted her 3 weeks earlier, claiming he was investigating a crime ring and needed her help as a witness. He'd gained her trust over multiple meetings, always professional, always by the book. Then tonight, he'd shown up at her apartment with zip ties and a camera, telling her she was going to help him in a different way. As we arrested Brennan, he kept insisting we were interfering with a federal investigation. He demanded to speak to his supervisor and claimed we'd compromised months of undercover work. But the evidence in that apartment told a very different story. The most disturbing part came when we searched his vehicle. In the trunk, we found detailed files on 12 different women, all between the ages of 22 and 35, all living alone. Each file contained surveillance photos, work schedules, home addresses, and personal information that could only have been obtained through law enforcement databases. Sarah Mitchell was victim number 7. When we contacted the FBI's Sacramento Field Office, the response was immediate and intense. Within an hour, we had federal investigators swarming the scene. But instead of trying to cover for Brennan, they were more horrified than we were. It turned out that several missing person cases they'd been working were connected to the files we'd found. The FBI's Internal Affairs Division took over immediately, but they kept us involved because we'd made the arrest. What they told us was terrifying. They suspected Brennan had been using his federal access to target victims for months, possibly years. His position in violent crimes gave him perfect cover. He could approach women as a legitimate federal agent investigating crimes, gain their trust, and then, well, we were still uncovering the full scope. Sarah Mitchell survived, but she told us about the psychological manipulation Brennan had used. He'd convinced her that she was in danger from a human trafficking ring, that only he could protect her, and that she needed to trust him completely. When she finally became suspicious and tried to call 911, he'd overpowered her and restrained her. The case made national news within 48 hours. A decorated FBI agent using his credentials and access to prey on women. It was every citizen's worst nightmare about law enforcement corruption. But what we didn't realize at the time was that Brennan wasn't working alone. 3 days after his arrest, while he was being held in federal custody, something happened that changed everything. Another FBI agent, someone we'd never heard of, contacted our department with information that suggested Brennan's activities were part of something much larger, a network that included other federal agents and possibly local law enforcement. I thought arresting a corrupt FBI agent was the worst thing I'd ever encounter in my career. I was wrong. What's the most disturbing thing about this case? It wasn't just that a federal agent had gone rogue. It was how easily he'd been able to use his legitimate authority to victimize innocent people. How do you trust law enforcement when the people meant to protect you are the ones causing harm? Have you ever had an encounter with law enforcement that felt wrong, even if you couldn't put your finger on why? What would you do if someone with a badge and credentials asked you to trust them completely? I've been with the FBI's Internal Affairs Division for 8 years, and I thought I'd seen every type of corruption imaginable. What happened on July 14, 2023, proved me wrong in the most terrifying way possible. What started as a routine investigation into Agent David Brennan's Sacramento arrest became the discovery of something that made me question everyone I worked with. My name is Marcus Thompson, and I was assigned as the lead investigator on the Brennan case 3 days after his arrest by Sacramento PD. The initial reports were damning enough, a decorated agent using his credentials to target vulnerable women. But what we uncovered went far beyond one rogue agent. It was 9:30 a.m. when I walked into the Phoenix Field office conference room to begin interviewing Agent Jennifer Walsh, Brennan's former partner. The Arizona summer heat was already brutal, and the air conditioning in the federal building was struggling. Walsh had driven down from Flagstaff overnight after we'd contacted her, and she looked exhausted. Jennifer Walsh was a 12-year veteran, clean record, specialized in cybercrime and human trafficking cases. She'd worked with Brennan on several joint operations between Sacramento and Phoenix offices over the past 2 years. On paper, she was the perfect witness, professional, experienced, and with no apparent connection to Brennan's personal activities. "Agent Walsh, thank you for coming in," I said, setting up my recording equipment. "I want to be clear that you're not under investigation. We're trying to understand how Agent Brennan was able to operate without detection for so long." She nodded, but something in her eyes made me uncomfortable. In 8 years of investigating corrupt agents, you develop an instinct for when someone is hiding something. Walsh was nervous, but not in the way innocent people usually are when questioned about a colleague's crimes. "David was always professional when we worked together," she began. "Our cases mostly involved online trafficking rings. He had excellent technical skills and was particularly good at building rapport with victims and witnesses." That should have been a red flag right there. According to the Sacramento evidence, Brennan's ability to gain victims' trust was exactly what made him so dangerous. "Did he ever discuss his methods for approaching witnesses or potential victims?" I asked. He had developed some innovative techniques for making initial contact. He felt that traditional law enforcement approaches often scared victims away, especially in trafficking cases where victims might not trust authorities. The way she phrased it was too careful, too rehearsed. I've interviewed hundreds of agents, and no one talks about innovative techniques, unless they're trying to make something questionable sound legitimate. "Agent Walsh, I need you to be specific. What exactly were these techniques?" That's when her composure cracked slightly. She glanced toward the door, then back at me. "He would sometimes approach potential witnesses in non-official settings. Coffee shops, their workplaces, social events. He felt it was less intimidating than showing up at their homes with credentials." Every alarm bell in my head was going off. Approaching witnesses in unofficial settings, without backup or proper documentation, violated multiple FBI protocols. If Walsh knew about this and didn't report it, she was potentially complicit in Brennan's activities. "How often did these unofficial approaches occur?" I pressed. I'm not sure. David handled most of the initial witness contacts on our joint cases. He said it was more efficient that way. I stopped the recording. "Agent Walsh, I need to step out for a moment. Please don't discuss this conversation with anyone." I walked directly to my supervisor's office and called Sacramento PD. Detective Lisa Rodriguez, who had arrested Brennan, answered immediately. "Agent Thompson, what can I do for you?" "Detective Rodriguez, in your evidence collection, did you find any documentation linking Brennan to cases in Arizona or other states?" "Actually, yes. We found files on victims in Phoenix, Tucson, and Albuquerque. We were planning to contact those field offices today." My blood went cold. "How many victims?" "At least 6 more. Agent Thompson, there's something else. We found encrypted communications on Brennan's personal devices. Our tech guys are working on decryption, but the preliminary analysis suggests he was communicating with other law enforcement officers about these cases." I hung up and immediately called our Phoenix cybercrime unit. Within 30 minutes, I had a team pulling all communications between Brennan and any Phoenix-based agents, particularly Jennifer Walsh. When I returned to the interview room, Walsh was on her phone. She quickly ended the call when I entered. "Agent Walsh, I need to ask you directly, did you ever participate in or have knowledge of Agent Brennan approaching women outside of official FBI business?" Her face went pale. I think I need to speak with a lawyer." That was all the confirmation I needed. I immediately placed Walsh on administrative leave and contacted our field office security team. If she was involved in Brennan's activities, we needed to secure all her case files and communications immediately. But what we found in Walsh's records was worse than I could have imagined. Over the past 18 months, she had provided Brennan with detailed background information on over 20 women across Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada. These weren't random victims. They were specifically targeted. Walsh had used her access to federal databases to compile comprehensive profiles, work schedules, home addresses, relationship status, financial information, and psychological profiles. She'd been feeding this information to Brennan, who would then use it to approach these women under the guise of federal investigations. The most disturbing part was how systematic it was. Walsh would identify women who fit a specific profile, single, aged 22 to 35, with jobs that required them to work alone or travel. She'd research their backgrounds for vulnerabilities, then pass the information to Brennan. He would approach them weeks later, always with a credible story about needing their help with a federal investigation. When we cross-referenced Walsh's research with Brennan's victim files from Sacramento, the pattern was undeniable. Every woman he targeted had been pre-selected and researched by Walsh. She wasn't just covering for him, she was actively facilitating his crimes. But the investigation took another terrifying turn when we discovered that Walsh and Brennan weren't working alone. The encrypted communications Sacramento PD had found revealed a network that included at least 4 other federal agents across 3 states. Agent Robert Hendricks from the Albuquerque office, Agent Lisa Martinez from Las Vegas, and Agent Kevin Foster from our own Phoenix office were all part of what appeared to be an organized network of corrupt federal agents. They were sharing victim information, coordinating approaches, and even trading victims between different regions to avoid detection. The scope was staggering. Over 2 years, this network had targeted at least 43 women across the Southwest. They used their federal credentials and database access to select victims, research their vulnerabilities, and approach them with elaborate stories about federal investigations. What made it particularly insidious was how they exploited legitimate law enforcement procedures. They would claim to be investigating human trafficking, drug smuggling, or terrorism, all crimes that would justify asking for a victim's complete cooperation and secrecy. The women who trusted them thought they were helping federal investigations, not realizing they were being victimized by the very people meant to protect them. When we arrested Walsh, she immediately tried to cut a deal. The information she provided revealed the full scope of the network's operations. They had been active for over 3 years, with Brennan serving as the primary coordinator. He'd recruited other agents gradually, always starting with small favors, accessing databases for unofficial research, providing backup on sensitive operations that couldn't go through normal channels. Each agent thought they were part of legitimate, if unconventional, law enforcement activities. By the time they realized what they were actually facilitating, they were too compromised to back out without destroying their careers and facing criminal charges. The psychological manipulation these agents used on their victims was sophisticated and terrifying. They would approach women with stories about immediate danger, telling them they were potential targets of trafficking rings, that their personal information had been compromised, or that they had been identified as witnesses to federal crimes. The agents would then position themselves as the only people who could provide protection, but only if the victims trusted them completely and followed their instructions exactly. Over the following weeks, our investigation expanded to 5 field offices. We discovered that the network had been using official FBI resources, vehicles, safe houses, and communication equipment to facilitate their crimes. They had created an entire shadow operation within the Bureau, complete with fake case files and fabricated evidence to justify their activities. The most chilling discovery came when we analyzed their victim selection criteria. They weren't choosing women randomly. They were specifically targeting those who would be most vulnerable to federal authority, and least likely to be believed if they reported abuse. Women with minor criminal records, immigration issues, or financial problems. Women who would be afraid to challenge federal agents or go to local police. 3 of the victims we interviewed described nearly identical experiences. An agent would approach them in a public place, show credentials, and explain that they were in immediate danger from a criminal organization. The agent would insist on meeting privately to discuss protection options, always in isolated locations. Once alone with the victim, the agent would use a combination of fear tactics and false promises of safety to maintain control. When we finally arrested the entire network, we found evidence of crimes spanning 4 years and 8 states. The conspiracy involved 7 federal agents, 2 local police officers, and 3 civilian accomplices who provided logistical support. But here's what still haunts me about this case. Every single one of these agents had exemplary service records. They had solved major cases, received commendations, and were trusted by their colleagues and supervisors. Brennan had been nominated for a Distinguished Service Award just 6 months before his arrest. The network operated by exploiting the very trust and authority that federal agents are sworn to protect. They used legitimate law enforcement tools and procedures to commit the exact crimes they were supposed to investigate. And they did it so skillfully that it took a chance encounter with alert Sacramento police officers to expose them. Jennifer Walsh received 15 years in federal prison. The other network members received sentences ranging from 8 to 20 years. But the damage to the victims, and to public trust in federal law enforcement, may never be fully repaired. The Bureau implemented new oversight procedures, mandatory partner rotations, and enhanced monitoring of database access. But I know that somewhere out there, another corrupt agent might be reading about these safeguards and figuring out how to circumvent them. The most disturbing thing about this case wasn't just that federal agents had gone rogue. It was how easily they had convinced each other that their actions were justified. In their minds, they weren't criminals. They were innovative law enforcement officers using unconventional methods to achieve legitimate goals. But what happened next in our investigation revealed something even more terrifying about the scope of corruption within federal law enforcement. What we thought was an isolated network turned out to be connected to something much larger. Have you ever trusted someone completely because of their position or authority? How do you know when legitimate law enforcement contact crosses the line into something more sinister? What would you do if a federal agent approached you with a story that sounded both urgent and secret? I'm Special Agent Patricia Valdez with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, and in my 8 years with the Bureau, I thought I'd seen every type of stalking and surveillance case imaginable. What I discovered in July 2023, while investigating what seemed like a simple privacy invasion complaint in Bakersfield, California, shook me to my core and revealed connections to something far more sinister than I could have imagined. The case file landed on my desk on July 18, 2023, referred by the Kern County Sheriff's Office. Multiple residents in the Westfield Heights neighborhood had filed complaints about their neighbor, a woman named Angela Torres, who lived alone in a corner house on Magnolia Drive. The complaints were bizarre. Neighbors reported that Torres had been painting detailed pictures of their daily activities and allegedly selling personal information about their routines to unknown buyers. At first glance, it seemed like a routine privacy violation case, maybe some mental health issues involved. But what caught my attention was a note from Detective Mark Sullivan at Kern County. "This woman has surveillance capabilities that seem beyond what a civilian should possess. Requesting federal assistance." I drove out to Bakersfield on a sweltering Tuesday morning, the kind of heat that makes the asphalt shimmer like water. Westfield Heights was a middle-class subdivision built in the early 2000s, identical 2-story houses with small front yards and that planned community feel that's become so common in California's Central Valley. Detective Sullivan met me at the sheriff's station first to brief me on what they'd discovered. He was a veteran cop, probably close to retirement, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much. "Agent Valdez, I've been doing this for 23 years, and I've never encountered anything quite like Angela Torres," he said, pulling out a thick file. "She's 34 years old, no criminal history, worked as a graphic designer until 2019 when she inherited her grandmother's house on Magnolia Drive. That's when the complaints started." He showed me photos that residents had taken of Torres's front windows. Even from the street, you could see dozens of paintings displayed, all depicting scenes of people in their homes. Not abstract art or landscapes, but detailed, almost photographic representations of her neighbors going about their private lives. The Henderson family first noticed it in March. Sullivan continued. They saw a painting in her window that showed them eating dinner at their kitchen table. Perfect detail. What they were wearing, what food was on their plates, even their teenage daughter's homework spread out on the counter. The more he told me, the more disturbing it became. Torres had painted the Wilson family's morning routine, Mr. Wilson shaving in the bathroom mirror, Mrs. Wilson making coffee in her robe, their twin boys playing video games in the living room. She'd captured the Rodriguez family's evening activities with such precision that they could identify the specific TV show they'd been watching. But here's what really got our attention, Sullivan said, pulling out a manila envelope. 3 weeks ago, Mrs. Henderson found this in her mailbox. Inside was a printed email exchange. Someone had been selling detailed information about the Henderson family's schedule, when they left for work, when their daughter got home from school, when they typically went to bed, even their weekend patterns. The buyer was asking about security systems, pet schedules, and vacation plans. We traced the seller's email to Angela Torres, Sullivan said. But that's not the worst part. Show her the photos. What I saw next made my blood run cold. Hidden camera photos, taken from impossible angles, showing the insides of multiple homes. These weren't shots taken from across the street through windows. These were photos taken from inside the houses themselves, or from positions that would require sophisticated surveillance equipment. How the hell is she getting these shots? I asked. That's why we called you, Sullivan replied. We did a preliminary search of her property last week with a warrant for the privacy violations. What we found: Agent Valdez, this woman has equipment that costs more than most police departments' annual tech budgets. We drove to Magnolia Drive, and I could immediately see why the neighbors were terrified. Torres's house sat on a corner lot with clear sight lines to at least 6 other homes. Every window was covered with paintings, and not amateur work. These were professional quality pieces that captured intimate family moments with disturbing accuracy. Sullivan knocked on the door, and after several minutes, Angela Torres answered. She was exactly what I'd expected from reading witness statements: thin, pale, with wild curly hair and paint stains on her clothes. What I hadn't expected were her eyes. They were sharp, calculating, not the unfocused gaze of someone with mental health issues. Ms. Torres, this is FBI Special Agent Valdez. We have some questions about your art and your activities in the neighborhood. Her response chilled me. I've been expecting federal involvement. My clients mentioned there might be government interest in my work. Clients. Plural. We asked to see her art studio, and she led us to what had once been the house's garage. It had been converted into a sophisticated surveillance center disguised as an artist's workshop. Easels with paintings were positioned throughout the room, but they were just camouflage for the real equipment. Against one wall were monitors displaying live feeds from at least 12 different cameras. Some showed exterior views of neighboring houses, but others showed interior rooms, bedrooms, kitchens, bathrooms. The technical setup was beyond anything I'd seen outside of federal facilities. Ms. Torres, where did you get this equipment? I asked. My clients provide the tools necessary for accurate documentation, she replied matter-of-factly. Art requires precision. People's lives have patterns, rhythms. I simply capture those patterns and share them with those who appreciate such detailed observations. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. On one of the monitors, I could see the inside of what looked like an apartment. The furniture arrangement was familiar, and then I realized why. It matched the description from the Sacramento police report about Sarah Mitchell's apartment, the victim from the FBI agent case I'd been briefed on. Ms. Torres, who are your clients? Who's buying this information? She smiled, and it was the most unsettling expression I'd ever seen. Law enforcement professionals who understand the value of comprehensive surveillance. They appreciate my artistic interpretation of human behavior patterns. Detective Sullivan and I exchanged glances. This wasn't just a privacy violation case. Torres was providing detailed surveillance intelligence to buyers who had the resources to equip her with professional-grade equipment. We arrested her immediately on federal charges related to wire fraud and interstate commerce violations. But as we processed her house, what we found revealed the true scope of her operation. Torres had files on over 40 families across 3 different counties. Each file contained detailed behavioral profiles, daily schedules, security vulnerabilities, and personal information that could only have been gathered through extended surveillance. But more disturbing were the invoices we found. She'd been selling this information for significant amounts of money. The buyer information was encrypted, but our cybercrime unit eventually cracked it. What they found connected directly to the Sacramento case I'd been monitoring. Several of Torres's clients were using federal law enforcement email addresses, including one that belonged to David Brennan, the corrupt FBI agent who'd been arrested for assaulting women. Torres wasn't just a disturbed neighbor with boundary issues, she was part of a network providing surveillance intelligence to corrupt law enforcement officers who were using it to target victims. Her art was actually reconnaissance reports, and her clients were using federal resources to identify and stalk potential victims. During interrogation, Torres revealed that she'd been recruited through an online forum where people discussed surveillance art and behavioral documentation. She claimed she didn't know her clients were using the information to harm people. She thought she was providing intelligence for legitimate investigations. But the evidence suggested otherwise. In her communications with clients, she'd specifically highlighted information about women living alone, their work schedules, when they'd be most vulnerable. She'd even provided recommendations for approach strategies based on her observations of their personalities and behavioral patterns. The most terrifying discovery came when we analyzed her client communications. Torres had been working with at least 6 different law enforcement professionals across multiple agencies: FBI, local police, and federal marshals. They were using her surveillance intelligence to coordinate targeting of victims, sharing information across jurisdictional lines to avoid detection. What started as a complaint about a weird neighbor painting pictures had uncovered a surveillance network that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement. Torres was arrested and ultimately sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, but the investigation into her clients was just beginning. 3 days after Torres's arrest, I received a call that changed everything. Another FBI agent from a different field office had discovered similar surveillance operations in 2 other states, all connected to the same network we'd uncovered in Bakersfield. The scariest part of this entire case? Angela Torres wasn't the mastermind, she was just a tool. Someone with significant resources and federal access had recruited her, equipped her, and directed her surveillance activities. We'd caught the artist, but the people commissioning her work were still out there. What disturbs me most is how easily Torres had infiltrated an entire neighborhood without anyone suspecting the true nature of her activities. She hid behind the facade of being an eccentric artist while conducting military-grade surveillance on innocent families. Have you ever noticed someone in your neighborhood who seemed to know too much about your daily routine? How well do you really know the people who can observe your home and family? What would you do if you discovered someone had been watching and documenting your most private moments? I'm retired Special Agent Frank Morrison, and after 32 years with the FBI, I thought I'd earned a quiet retirement in my cabin outside Asheville, North Carolina. What I discovered about my own grandson in October 2023 destroyed everything I believed about family, loyalty, and the badge I'd worn with pride for over 3 decades. Sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones sleeping in the bedroom down the hall. My grandson Tyler Morrison had followed in the family tradition, 3rd generation FBI. I was proud when he graduated from Quantico in 2019, proud when he was assigned to the Charlotte Field Office's Cybercrimes Unit. Tyler had always been brilliant with computers, even as a kid, and I thought he'd found his calling combining technology skills with law enforcement. Tyler had been living with me since his divorce finalized in early 2023. He said he needed time to get back on his feet, and I was happy for the company. At 67, living alone in the mountains gets lonely, especially after losing my wife Margaret 2 years ago. Having Tyler around reminded me of when he was young and would spend summers at our cabin, fascinated by my old case files and war stories from the Bureau. But on October 12, 2023, I discovered that the grandson I'd raised, the agent I'd mentored, was part of something so corrupt and dangerous that it made my blood run cold. It started when Tyler forgot to log out of his laptop before leaving for a 3-day assignment in Atlanta. He'd been working at our kitchen table, and when I went to clear his coffee cup, I noticed his bureau email was still open. I wasn't trying to snoop. Old habits from 32 years of investigations die hard, and I always notice when screens are left active. What I saw made me sit down hard in that kitchen chair. Tyler's inbox contained encrypted messages from email addresses I didn't recognize, but the subject lines caught my attention. Bakersfield asset compromised, Sacramento package delivered, and surveillance network status update. My heart started pounding. I'd been briefed on both the Sacramento and Bakersfield cases through my old contacts at the Bureau, cases involving corrupt federal agents and surveillance networks. But Tyler was assigned to cybercrimes, not violent crimes or corruption investigations. I shouldn't have opened those emails. Part of me wishes I hadn't. But 32 years of investigating corruption had taught me that when you see smoke, there's always fire underneath. The first email was from someone identified only as Control 7, and contained detailed information about FBI internal investigations into agent misconduct. But this wasn't official Bureau communication. This was intelligence being shared to help corrupt agents avoid detection. The email specifically mentioned Agent Brennan's arrest compromising operational security, and the need to eliminate surveillance artists before testimony. My hand shook as I read further. Tyler wasn't just receiving this information, he was contributing to it. His responses showed he'd been using his cybercrimes access to monitor FBI internal affairs investigations, tracking which agents were under suspicion and what evidence had been gathered. But the worst revelation came in an email thread from 3 weeks earlier. Tyler had been tasked with identifying and eliminating digital evidence related to the surveillance network. Using his legitimate FBI access, he'd been systematically destroying computer files, surveillance footage, and electronic communications that could expose the corruption network. I sat in that kitchen for 2 hours, reading through months of correspondence. Tyler wasn't just a corrupt agent, he was the IT specialist keeping the entire network operational. He'd been using Bureau resources to coordinate between corrupt agents across multiple field offices, encrypt their communications, and eliminate evidence of their activities. The scope was staggering. Tyler had been in contact with agents in Sacramento, Bakersfield, Phoenix, Denver, and Charlotte. They were sharing information about ongoing investigations, target identification, and operational security. What had started as individual corrupt agents had evolved into an organized criminal network operating within federal law enforcement. But what broke my heart was discovering Tyler's role in victim targeting. Using his cyber access, he'd been running background checks on potential victims, identifying women who lived alone, had minimal family connections, and were unlikely to be immediately missed if something happened to them. He was essentially creating shopping lists for predators with badges. I found communications between Tyler and someone identified as Asset 12, who I realized from context clues was Angela Torres, the surveillance artist from Bakersfield. Tyler had been coordinating her equipment procurement and providing her with target lists based on FBI database searches. The most damning evidence was an encrypted file on Tyler's laptop containing what appeared to be a comprehensive database of corrupt federal agents, their specialties, geographical coverage areas, and operational protocols. Tyler wasn't just participating in corruption, he was managing it. When Tyler returned from Atlanta on October 15th, I was waiting for him in the living room with all the evidence printed out. I've interrogated terrorists, organized crime figures, and serial killers, but I'd never felt as sick to my stomach as I did confronting my own grandson. Tyler, we need to talk, I said, gesturing to the stack of papers on the coffee table. The moment he saw those printouts, his entire demeanor changed. The Tyler I'd raised, the respectful young man who called me Grandpa Frank, disappeared. What I saw in his eyes was cold calculation and something that looked like contempt. You shouldn't have accessed my work files, Grandpa. That's a federal crime. Your work files? Tyler, you're part of a criminal network that's using federal badges to prey on innocent people. What happened next will haunt me forever. Tyler didn't deny it. He didn't express remorse or claim he'd been coerced. Instead, he smiled. The same smile I'd seen when he was 12 years old and got away with something he shouldn't have. You think the Bureau is some noble institution, don't you? 32 years of playing by the rules, following procedures, believing in justice. You never understood that the badge isn't about protecting people, it's about power. And power should be used. Tyler explained, with terrifying calmness, how he'd been recruited during his second year at the Charlotte field office. A senior agent had approached him about special projects that required his technical skills. What started as minor rule bending, accessing databases for unauthorized searches, encrypting communications outside normal channels, had gradually evolved into managing a network of corrupt agents across multiple states. We provide services, Grandpa. Law enforcement professionals who understand that the system is broken. Citizens who can't get justice through normal channels. People who need problems solved efficiently. The way he said "problem solved" made my blood run cold. This wasn't just corruption. This was organized criminal activity using federal resources and authority. Tyler told me about the money. Substantial payments from clients who needed surveillance, background checks, evidence elimination, or intervention services. The network had been operating for at least 3 years, with Tyler managing the technical infrastructure that kept them invisible to internal investigations. You trained me well, Grandpa. All those summers listening to your case stories, learning about investigative techniques and evidence protocols. I just applied those lessons more creatively. I realized then that I had two choices. I could protect my family and try to handle this privately, or I could do what 32 years of wearing the badge had taught me was right. I chose the badge. While Tyler was in the shower that evening, I contacted my former supervisor at the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility. Within 12 hours, federal investigators were at my cabin with search warrants and arrest warrants. Tyler was arrested on October 16, 2023, on charges including conspiracy, wire fraud, computer fraud, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. The evidence on his laptop led to arrests of 14 other federal agents across 6 states. But the hardest part came during Tyler's interrogation. He provided detailed information about the network's operations in exchange for a reduced sentence. What he revealed connected directly to the Sacramento and Bakersfield cases, showing how the corruption had spread through federal law enforcement like a cancer. Tyler admitted to destroying evidence in over 30 cases, providing intelligence that led to harassment and assault of at least a dozen women, and coordinating criminal activities between corrupt agents for over 2 years. The surveillance artist Angela Torres had been just one asset in a much larger operation. The network had been using federal databases to identify victims, coordinate surveillance, eliminate evidence, and even intimidate witnesses who might testify against corrupt agents. Tyler's technical skills had made it possible for them to operate undetected within the Bureau's own systems. During his sentencing hearing, Tyler looked directly at me and said, "I learned everything I know about power and authority from you, Grandpa. The only difference is I was honest about using it." Tyler Morrison was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. 14 other federal agents received sentences ranging from 8 to 25 years. The investigation is ongoing, with evidence suggesting the network extended into other federal agencies and local law enforcement. I testified at his trial. I provided evidence that helped convict my own grandson and destroy the family legacy I'd spent 32 years building. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most important. The worst part isn't that Tyler was corrupt. It's that he used everything I'd taught him about justice and law enforcement to become exactly what we'd spent careers fighting against. Every lesson about investigative techniques, every story about catching bad guys, every principle about protecting the innocent, he twisted it all into tools for predation and abuse. I've had to ask myself hard questions about whether I missed signs, whether I somehow contributed to his corruption. But I've concluded that some people will always choose power over principle, no matter how they're raised or what values they're taught. The Bureau forced me to undergo psychological evaluation and polygraph testing to ensure I hadn't been involved in Tyler's activities. After 32 years of service, they had to investigate whether I was complicit in my own grandson's crimes. I passed, but the experience destroyed any remaining faith I had in institutional loyalty. 3 weeks after Tyler's arrest, I received a call from the lead investigator on the Sacramento case. They'd found evidence linking Tyler to additional victims and ongoing criminal activities. The network we'd uncovered was even larger than initially suspected. What scares me most is wondering how many other Tyler Morrisons are out there, corrupt agents using federal authority to facilitate crimes while their families remain completely unaware. How do you trust an institution when the people enforcing the law are the ones breaking it? Have you ever discovered something devastating about a family member that changed everything you thought you knew about them? How far would you go to do the right thing, even if it meant destroying the people you love most? I'm Special Agent Rebecca Chim with the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division, and my German Shepherd partner Kaiser and I have been tracking fugitives and solving cases for 6 years. What we uncovered in December 2023, while investigating a human trafficking operation in the small town of Cedar Ridge, Oregon, became the final piece of a puzzle that exposed the largest corruption network in modern FBI history. Sometimes it takes a dog's instincts to find what human intelligence misses. The call came on December 8, 2023, from the Oregon State Police. They'd received reports of suspicious activity in Cedar Ridge, a lumber town of about 3,200 people nestled in the Cascade Mountains. Local residents had noticed unusual traffic patterns, expensive vehicles with out-of-state plates arriving at odd hours, people who didn't seem to belong in a small mountain community, and what appeared to be coordinated movements between several properties. Kaiser and I were assigned to the case because of our specialization in tracking and our success rate with human trafficking investigations. Cedar Ridge was exactly the kind of isolated location that criminal networks use for operations they want to keep hidden from federal oversight. The drive to Cedar Ridge took us through dense forests and winding mountain roads. It was the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where strangers stand out immediately, and where secrets are hard to keep. The winter weather was brutal, snow had been falling for 3 days, and visibility was limited to maybe 50 feet in most areas. We met with Sheriff Patricia Williams at the Clackamas County substation on the edge of town. She was a veteran law enforcement officer who'd been working these mountains for 15 years, and her concern was evident from the moment we sat down. "Agent Chen, what we're seeing doesn't match any normal criminal activity," she said, spreading out maps and photographs on her desk. "These aren't drug dealers or typical trafficking operations. The vehicles are too expensive, the people are too professional, and the coordination is too sophisticated." She showed us surveillance photos taken by concerned residents. The images revealed what appeared to be federal agents or law enforcement professionals, people in tactical gear, carrying official-looking equipment, operating with military precision. But they weren't part of any authorized federal operation in the area. "Sheriff, have you contacted other federal agencies about potential operations in your jurisdiction?" "That's just it. I've reached out to everyone. FBI, DA, ATF, U.S. Marshals, even Homeland Security. Nobody has active operations in Cedar Ridge. Whoever these people are, they're not here officially." Kaiser and I spent our first day in Cedar Ridge conducting reconnaissance and establishing baseline scent patterns for the area. Kaiser is trained in human tracking, drug detection, and explosive detection, but his real specialty is reading environmental changes that indicate recent human activity. We started at the Pine Valley Lodge on the outskirts of town, where several of the suspicious vehicles had been spotted. The lodge was supposedly closed for winter renovations, but Kaiser immediately alerted to recent human activity around the building, multiple individuals, within the last 24 to 48 hours. As we circled the building, Kaiser's behavior changed dramatically. His hackles raised, and he began exhibiting stress signals I'd only seen when he detected evidence of violence or death. Something at that lodge had triggered his instincts for danger. We obtained a search warrant based on the suspicious activity reports and Kaiser's alerts. What we found inside the Pine Valley Lodge changed everything I thought I knew about the cases I'd been following for months. The lodge had been converted into a sophisticated command center. Multiple computers, secure communication equipment, surveillance monitors, and detailed maps of the Pacific Northwest covered every surface. But what caught my attention immediately were the case files spread across multiple tables, files that I recognized from briefings about the Sacramento, Bakersfield, and Charlotte corruption cases. This wasn't a random criminal operation. This was the coordination center for the entire corrupt agent network that had been exposed over the past several months. Kaiser led me to a back room where we found something that made my blood run cold. Detailed surveillance files on federal investigators, prosecutors, and witnesses involved in the corruption cases. Photos, personal information, family details, daily routines, everything needed to intimidate or eliminate people who threatened the network. Among those files, I found my own. Photos of Kaiser and me conducting investigations, our home address, my family's information, and what appeared to be plans for operational intervention if we got too close to discovering their activities. But the most shocking discovery was a personnel roster showing the true scope of the corruption network. It wasn't just scattered corrupt agents. It was an organized criminal enterprise with over 40 federal agents, 15 local law enforcement officers, and dozens of civilian assets like Angela Torres spread across 11 states. The network had been using Cedar Ridge as their operational headquarters because of its isolation and the assumption that no one would look for federal corruption in a small mountain town. They'd been coordinating victim targeting, evidence destruction, witness intimidation, and operational security from this location for over 2 years. While I was processing the intelligence we'd discovered, Kaiser suddenly alerted to approaching vehicles. Through the lodge windows, I could see 3 black SUVs with federal plates driving up the mountain road. But I knew these weren't legitimate federal agents. They were network operatives who'd discovered our investigation. I immediately called for backup and prepared for what I knew would be a dangerous confrontation. These weren't random criminals. They were trained federal agents who'd gone rogue, and they had everything to lose if their network was exposed. Kaiser and I took defensive positions as the vehicles arrived. 6 individuals in tactical gear approached the lodge, moving with the precision of federal agents but without any of the protocols or identification procedures that legitimate operations require. FBI. This is Special Agent Chin. Identify yourselves and state your authority for being at this location. The response came in the form of gunfire. These corrupt agents were prepared to kill federal investigators to protect their criminal network. What followed was a 40-minute firefight in the mountains of Oregon, with Kaiser and me defending our position until backup arrived. Kaiser proved invaluable. His training allowed him to detect movement that I couldn't see in the limited visibility, and his alerts kept us ahead of flanking attempts. During the firefight, I could hear the suspects coordinating their activities using federal radio protocols and tactical terminology. These weren't amateur criminals. They were experienced law enforcement officers using their training to attempt to murder a federal agent and her K-9 partner. Oregon State Police and FBI tactical teams arrived just as the suspects were attempting to overrun our position. In the ensuing operation, 4 of the 6 suspects were arrested, while 2 others escaped into the forest. The arrested individuals included agents from the FBI, DEA, and U.S. Marshals Service, the very agencies that were supposed to be investigating corruption, not participating in it. The evidence we recovered from the Pine Valley Lodge led to the largest corruption investigation in FBI history. The network had been operating for over 4 years, involving agents from 17 different field offices and resulting in crimes against at least 63 victims across multiple states. Kaiser's alerts and tracking abilities had been crucial to the investigation. His detection of violence-related scents at the lodge led us to a hidden basement where we found evidence of torture and murder. The network hadn't just been committing fraud and harassment. They'd been eliminating witnesses and potential threats through violence. The connection to previous cases became clear through the recovered files. David Brennan from Sacramento, Angela Torres from Bakersfield, and Tyler Morrison from Charlotte had all been coordinating through the Cedar Ridge Command Center. But they were just the visible parts of a much larger criminal organization. The most disturbing revelation came during the interrogation of the arrested agents. They revealed that the network had been planning to eliminate key witnesses and investigators, including myself, to prevent the full scope of their activities from being exposed. The firefight at Pine Valley Lodge hadn't been random. It had been a planned assassination attempt. Over the following weeks, the evidence from Cedar Ridge led to arrests of 37 federal agents, 22 local law enforcement officers, and dozens of civilian accomplices across 11 states. The network had been generating millions of dollars through extortion, fraud, witness intimidation, and contract violence. Kaiser received a commendation for his role in the investigation, and his detection work became a case study for K-9 units across the country. But what I'll never forget is how his instincts detected danger and violence that human investigators had missed. The final tally was staggering: a criminal network that had infiltrated federal law enforcement at the highest levels, committed crimes against hundreds of victims, and come within minutes of assassinating federal investigators to protect their operations. The Cedar Ridge investigation closed the book on what became known as the Federal Corruption Network case. But it also raised disturbing questions about how such extensive criminal activity could operate within federal law enforcement for years without detection. What haunts me most is realizing that without Kaiser's instincts and alerts, we never would have uncovered the command center that tied together all the seemingly separate corruption cases. Human intelligence had missed the connections, but a German shepherd's nose and instincts found the truth. The network's plan to eliminate investigators and witnesses shows how far corrupt law enforcement will go to protect their criminal activities. They were prepared to commit murder to maintain their operations, using federal authority and training to facilitate violence against the very citizens they'd sworn to protect. Today, Kaiser and I continue our work with a deeper understanding of how corruption can spread through institutions that citizens trust. We've learned that sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones wearing badges, and that protecting the public sometimes means investigating the protectors themselves. The people of Cedar Ridge helped solve one of the largest corruption cases in FBI history simply by reporting suspicious activity in their community. Their willingness to speak up about things that didn't seem right ultimately saved lives and exposed a criminal network that reached into the highest levels of federal law enforcement. What strikes me most about this entire investigation is how it started with individual cases: a domestic violence call in Sacramento, privacy complaints in Bakersfield, a grandfather's discovery about his grandson, and suspicious activity in a small mountain town. Each seemed isolated, but they were all connected to the same criminal network. Have you ever noticed suspicious activity in your community that law enforcement might need to investigate? Do you trust your instincts when something doesn't seem right, even if you can't explain why? What would you do if you discovered that the people meant to protect your community were actually the ones threatening it? Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.